How's it going, everyone? My name is Dieugirl, and welcome back to Book 1, Into the Light. Last time we left off, Besh, Tristina, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were at their wits' end, with only themselves and Fluffy standing in between Snape and the Sorcerer's Stone. So, before we get into it today, I just want to say yes, I am feeling better from my cold. Thank you so much, everyone, for the well wishes. Also, I want to say that the first Rust episode is coming. If it hasn't already premiered, I don't know. I might have to switch things around. I've had to move. Special thank you to Digital Ghost for helping me set up my own private server in order to record the episodes and to continue on. So let's do it. That night, the 5 first years met in the common room, trusting that the other students would be fast asleep. Because they didn't want to risk anything, they declined from making the room any lighter than the fireplace granted. "All set," Besh whispered towards the general direction of the girls' dorm, and a voice answered. "Sparky ready, Besh. Hermione ready, too." "Right, Besh, we're ready to go." "All right," said Harry. "Let's go then." He trailed off as he saw a shadow moving on the floor. Then he heard a frog croak, or a toad. "Trevor, you shouldn't be here," Ron said. "Neither should you," a voice said shakily, yet strongly, from a chair hidden in the shadows. "Neville?" Besh asked. There was more silence. Then, "You're going out again, aren't you? You'll lose us even more house points." Besh hissed at that. The 5 of them had been made practically pariahs in the school after that had happened. Even the Quidditch team refused to speak to them, and if they had to talk about them, it was the Dream Team Trio, with the unheard derisive snort at the end. The last thing Besh wanted was for anyone to bring it up. "You'll get Gryffindor into trouble again. I'll fight you." Besh smirked and bared his fangs, but Hermione just stepped forward. Shaking her head sadly, she said, "I'm really sorry about this, Neville. Petrificus totalis," she said, pointing her wand at Neville, who fell backwards, completely paralyzed, except for his eyes. "You're scary sometimes," Ron said, gulping. "Brilliant, but scary." They all stepped over Neville, each apologizing as they did so. As Tiff stepped over, she took a brown bag from Neville's pocket and said, "Sorry, Neville. Might need these later." She pecked him on the forehead and put her invisibility cloak over herself and Harry. They decided that, since they had 2, that Harry and Tiff would share hers, and Besh, Ron, and Hermione would share Harry's. They walked out of the common room and headed for Fluffy's chamber, Tiff letting the others know where she was by carefully leaving part of her tail visible. It didn't take them too long to get to Fluffy, and they slipped inside to find Fluffy. "He's sleeping," Besh noted. Hermione rolled her eyes, and Tiff pointed at a harp still playing on its own in a corner. Besh saw what she was pointing at and said, "Which means Snape has already gotten past Fluffy." Harry nodded, and Hermione said, "We'll have to move his paw." She, Besh, Ron, Harry, and Tiff all pushed on Fluffy's paw covering the trap door, and moved it with little trouble. As they opened the door, one of Fluffy's eyes cracked open. Tiff saw it and said, "Harry!" None of the others were paying attention, all trying to see down into the darkness. Besh could see better, having cat eyes to use, but all he could see was dark, which meant it was a long drop. "If anything happens, get yourselves out," Harry said, as he started to climb into the hole. "Harry!" Tiff said, a little more insistently. Then the harp stopped. "Does it seem a little quieter in here?" Harry asked. Losing patience, Tiff let out a quiescent roar, a sound reminiscent of a cow dying, and the other four looked up to see two of Fluffy's heads looking at them. The third was looking at Tiff. In a spurt of bravery, Tiff shouted, "Ata Naga!" and launched herself at one of Fluffy's heads, effectively keeping it occupied. Harry, Ron, and Hermione all jumped down the trapdoor, and Besh yelled, "Jump off, Sparky!" She did so, and Besh opened his mouth and let out a tiger roar, startling Fluffy long enough for Besh to jump down after the other four. They fell down through complete darkness and landed with a soft thump on something oddly soft. "What is this?" Besh thought as he tried to get up. He heard Hermione shriek and looked down to find vines wrapping themselves tightly around his body. "This is Devil's Snare," said Hermione. "Don't struggle, just relax. If you don't, it'll only kill you faster." "Kill us faster? Oh, now I can relax," Ron said sarcastically as he, Harry, Tiff, and Besh continued to try to break free of the deadly vines. Hermione merely shot Ron a glare before being sucked down into the plant. "Hermione!" Besh cried. "I'm fine. Just relax," she called. Besh and Harry caught each other's eye and nodded and forced themselves to relax. They too sunk through the plant and found themselves falling onto a stone floor with a thud. "Ugh," Besh said as he stood up and helped up Harry. Meanwhile, Ron was still screaming. Hermione and Besh rolled their eyes, and Hermione pointed her wand up and said, "Lumos Solem!" A huge light shot out of her wand, and the plant cowered, allowing Ron and Tiff to fall through to the chamber beneath. Harry and Hermione caught Tiff, and Besh caught Ron, and set him upright. Tiff groaned a little, and Besh furrowed his brow in concern, but she just shook her head a little and said, "Sparky, okay? No worry." Slightly relieved, Besh's ears twitched, and he said, "Does anyone hear that?" "Sounds like keys," Tiff said, tilting her ear in the same direction. They walked to the next door and opened it to find a large, spacious room with what looked like keys. "They're winged keys," Hermione said, as Ron strode across the room and tried to unlock the door. "Alohomora!" he shouted, and the knob didn't budge. Besh laughed and said, "Ron, Hermione just said the room is full of winged keys. That means—" "We've got to find the key that matches." "There," Harry said, pointing at a large grey key with one bent wing flying slightly erratically. He looked at the opposite wall and found 3 broomsticks. "Looks like we've got a game to play," Harry said, walking over to them, and Besh and Tiff behind him. They each grabbed a broomstick and flew into the air. As they did so, all of the keys started zooming around. Besh said, "Let Harry find the key. He isn't the youngest seeker in a century for nothing." So he and Tiff waited, shielding themselves from keys until Harry said, "Found it!" They took off in the direction of his voice to find him chasing it through the air. "That isn't working," Besh thought, right as Harry stopped and said, "We need a strategy. Besh, you come from above. Tiff, you come from below. I'll go straight forward." The 2 anthros nodded and flew to their respective positions to wait for Harry's signal. "Go!" Harry shouted, and Besh dived. Tiff rocketed upwards, and Harry shot forward. The key dodged Besh and Tiff, and Harry pinned it against a wall. "Got it!" he said triumphantly. Tiffany let out a cheering roar, then yelped as she caught herself. She laughed, grinning sheepishly. Sparky get too happy, she said, grinning. Once the three had landed, they came into a room with large chamber-like pots. This one for Sparky, Tiffany whispered, holding them back with one hand. She stepped forward, her bare feet feeling the smooth stone beneath. Suddenly, Tiffany pushed them all to one side as a ball of light barreled towards them. Shielding their eyes, the five looked up to see a glowing dummy of a Quessa approaching them. What are the conditions of this battle? Tiffany asked in Kisan. We fight until one of us is unconscious. Self-sacrifice is an option in order to let your friends pass, said Professor Dumbledore's voice in the magical dummy Quessa. Tristina nodded and translated the instructions to the others in English. Tick, you can't! There must be another way! Hermione cried, tears welling in her eyes. Hermione wants to stop Snape from getting stolen or no? Tiffany asked, her English becoming rougher as she yelled. Besh! Tiffany turned at her friend as tears sparkled in her eyes. This Sparky fight, no yours. Go with Harry, Ron, Hermione. Sparky catch up. Sparky promise. Tiffany then turned back to the dummy as the other four backed away. Spreading out her hands, 2 Kai balls appeared in them. The dummy did the same, and the two launched a beam of Kai at each other. Run! Tiffany yelled. Sparky keep dummy busy! Run! Sparky catch up! Tiffany cried over the roar of energy. Harry, Ron, and Hermione rushed off, but Besh stayed behind. Besh, go! No stop! Sparky catch up! Sparky promise! Tiffany yelled. Besh nodded, backed away, and then ran to catch up with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. The trio held the door open for Besh as he ran towards them. Suddenly, the dummy changed his aim from Tiffany to Besh, who was almost at the door. The dummy aimed for Besh, charging up. Naga! Tiffany screamed, leaping in between the dummy and Besh. The dummy fired, and Tiffany let out another scream as Besh pelted through the door. Turning, he saw the Quessa fall, her eyes closed and her robe singed. No! Besh screamed, running back towards Tiffany. Hermione and Harry held Besh back, while Ron sadly shut the door. Besh snarled at Harry and Hermione and roared, Let me go! With a growl that shook Harry and Hermione to their bones, Besh broke free of their grip. When he turned to look at them, his pupils were paper-thin slits, his fangs had grown, and so had his claws. Should be okay, he growled in a deadly voice. Besh, we need to calm down, said Hermione calmly. Tiff herself said she'd be fine. If we can't trust her to keep her word, who can we trust? Besh saw the sense in this, and, with some effort, forced himself to calm back down. His pupils dilated, and his fangs and claws retracted. All right, let's move on, he said in a much calmer voice, and Harry and Hermione visibly relaxed. This is a giant chess set, said Ron in awe. Besh smirked and said, Good thing we have you here, then, isn't it? Ron nodded and punched Besh in the arm. We have to play our way across. Harry, you take the place of that bishop, and Hermione and Besh take the place of those castles. Ron, what about you? Besh asked. Ron said firmly, I'm going to be a knight. The 4 first years took their designated places, those places having been vacated as Ron was speaking, and the game began. White always goes first in chess, Ron muttered, and sure enough, a white pawn moved forward 2 spaces. Ron, do you really suppose we can get hurt by these things? Harry asked, and Ron thought about it, and pointed to a pawn and said, You there! E5! The pawn moved forward, ending up diagonal from the white pawn, who unsheathed both swords and stabbed the black pawn straight through, crumpling it. Guess that answers our question, Ron said. Harry, Besh, and Hermione agreed. They played through the game, Ron directing them with all the skill he possessed. They had gotten to a certain point, and Ron was at a loss what to do. Then it dawned on him. "Harry," he said, "I'm going to make the Queen take me out. They'll leave you to check the King." "No, Ron, you mustn't!" Hermione shouted, and Ron said, "Hermione, we have to do this to win." Hermione nodded and remained quiet. Ron said with a slightly queasy look, "Knight to e3. He moved his knight forward, and Ron said, "Check." The White Queen, in turn, moved towards him, unsheathed her sword, and busted Ron's horse. He fell to the ground, and Hermione shrieked and started to run over to him. "Hermione!" Besh and Harry both yelled at the same time. "Hermione, we're still playing," Besh said. "Don't move yet," Harry said, and Hermione nodded and remained on her square. Harry moved diagonally in front of the king and said strongly, "Checkmate." The king didn't move at first, but then his sword dropped from his hand and fell at Harry's feet, signifying they'd won the game. Meanwhile, back in the Kai challenge, Tiffany groaned and gingerly got to her feet. Blinking, her eyes adjusted to the sudden darkness, and she made her way towards the door. The dummy that had fought her was now lifeless on the floor. Opening the door, she stepped into a room that appeared to have been bombed. Broken stone statues were scattered all over the floor, and in the distance was Hermione kneeling beside Ron. "Tiffany! Oh, thank goodness!" Hermione cried, wrapping her arms around the Quessa, who winced. "Easy, Hermione. Spiky damaged goods too," she said, borrowing the phrase from a Muggle movie she had once seen. "Harry and Besh went ahead to get the stone," Hermione explained. "Harry told me to go to the Owlry and send a message to Dumbledore." "Spiky, help Hermione," said Tiffany, starting to pick up Ron's legs. "No," said Hermione, grabbing Tiffany's wrist. "I need you to help Besh and Harry. Besh was so upset when you were knocked out. He needs you." Tiffany nodded, hugged Hermione goodbye, and then hurried off after her friends. Meanwhile, Besh and Harry had found Quirrell standing in front of the mirror of Erised. As Quirrell forced Harry to look into the mirror, Harry watched as his reflection winked at him, then put the Sorcerer's Stone into his pocket. "Tell the truth!" Quirrell screamed. Then, reluctantly, Quirrell undid his turban and revealed... "Voldemort," Harry whispered. "Yes," said Voldemort in a hoarse whisper. "Do you see what I have become? See what I must do to survive? Live off another, a mere parasite, much like your friend, Mr. Besh." Besh snarled at this. "Speaking of which, brother, I believe you wanted to formally meet Mr. Besh," Voldemort called. Takama stepped out of the shadows and smiled evilly at Besh. Raising his hand, Takama fired a blast of Kai at Besh. Suddenly, a Kai shield erupted in front of Besh, and a growling voice snarled, "No, master!" Besh, Harry, and Takama turned to see Tiffany walking towards them, her ears folded back, her lips raised in a snarl, and her eyes temporarily alive with fury. "Master no hurt, Sparky friends," she growled, stopping beside Besh. Words couldn't express Besh's relief at seeing his friend well. "I was worried about you, Sparky. I guess I didn't need to." With that said, he slowly turned to Takama. Seeming to become more grown up as he drew himself to his full height, which was still small, though he was 11, Besh said, "Takama Wegenstorth, you are a coward. That's all you are. you implant a memorization field around your slaves' heads so they are too afraid to get their memories back or even try. I'm going to let you in on a secret, however. Your daughter will be different. So help me Merlin, I will do all in my power to see her freed from you. And a lesson to remember, Turkama, he said, smirking at the man, who was breathing heavily in rage. Fear is indeed a powerful weapon, but once you lose that, you have nothing. You will be nothing, have nothing, except your memories. If I had my way, I'd memorize you. Karma and all of that. Turkama roared, Silence, boy! I will kill you! And then started to run at Besh. Turkama! Voldemort cut in, hissing. Stop! He is not our target. Young Harry Potter is. But brother, he... Turkama! I will not tolerate this from you. I need your cooperation for this to work. The Sorcerer's Stone is yours to worry about. This boy needs to be taught a lesson about who Turkama Charles Vegenstroth is to him. Besh smirked again and said, Bring it on, Turkama Charles. Turkama yelled at Besh and started to run again. At Besh again, but Voldemort, Quirrell, grabbed Turkama's arm and yanked him backwards. If you attack him, you will ruin our plan, Voldemort hissed. And then, don't make me stop you, brother. Turkama, still shaking in rage, nodded. Voldemort got a sickly smile on his face, and he turned his attention to Harry. Harry, give me that stone, and I can make your wishes come true. I can give you your parents back. Harry gasped, and slowly, as though in a trance, pulled the Sorcerer's Stone out of his pocket. I hadn't realized he'd had it, Besh thought, as Harry held out the stone. Voldemort moved forward, and when he got close enough, he made a grab for it. Harry, it seemed, had other plans, as he threw it over Quirrell's head to Besh, who caught it deftly, his skills as a chaser kicking in. Voldemort snarled and headed for Besh, who threw it to Tiff, who threw it back to Besh, who threw it back to Harry. Voldemort ran at each of them and hissed, Help me, Turkama! Turkama nodded and ran at him, catching Besh off guard. His throw went awry, and the stone flew through the air. Please, someone catch it, Besh thought desperately, knowing he wouldn't be able to get to it in time. Then, as if in slow motion, Harry's hand wrapped around the stone, and Quirrell's hands wrapped around Harry's throat. The stone stumbled from Harry's grip as Turkama grabbed Tristina by the scruff of her neck. Tiffany jabbed her tail, quills extended into Turkama's hips. Turkama cried out in pain and released Tiffany, who went to kick Quirrell in the head. Harry grabbed the hand Quirrell was choking him with, and slowly it began to smoke. Crying out, Quirrell backed away. Fool! Voldemort cried. Give me the stone! Besh snatched up the blood-red stone as Turkama grabbed him around the throat. Before Besh could transform, Tiffany leapt on his back and began beating the back of his head. No! Hurt! Sparky! Friend! She cried, slamming her fist into his skull with each word. Turkama growled, grabbed the Professor by her throat, and hurled her into a stone pillar, knocking her out. Besh snarled as Turkama grabbed him around the throat, and outright roared when Turkama threw Tiff into the stone pillar. Don't touch her! He roared. He transformed into a huge lion with paws the size of bludgers. He reached out one paw, velveted as he didn't want to kill Takama. Yet. He used his paw to bat Takama into a wall, nearly knocking him unconscious. As Takama struggled to get up, Besh returned to his human-like form with a flash and ran to Tiff, managing to get her to stand up against the wall. That transformation had taken more out of him than he thought. He was focused on Takama, who was temporarily stunned and wouldn't be getting his movement back for a few minutes. Then he heard a pained yell and what sounded like something sizzling. He turned and saw Harry grab Quirrell's face, who started to smoke and turned to stone. Besh watched, slightly horrified, as Quirrell fell slowly backwards and crumbled into dust on the way to the road. A smoky beam came out of Quirrell's remains and ran straight through Harry, making him fall to the ground. Before Besh could make sense of what had happened, he heard movement and turned to see Takama running at them again. Besh panicked. He was too tired to fight Takama again. Please, Tiff. Please, wake up, he said quietly, holding her tighter as Takama came ever closer. Takama was actually 2 feet away when Tiff snapped a wick, held out her hand, and shot a blast of Kai, knocking Takama back to the other wall.
No hurt, Sparky friends,
Tiff said, and smiled at Besh, who could only smile back. He was about to get up and help her up, when suddenly he felt a hand hit the back of his head and started to sway. He saw Tiff's eyes close as well, and then his world got darker. The last thing he heard were footsteps and what sounded like another fight going on. The last thing he saw was a tall figure watching another figure run away, cloak in tatters. Then he gave himself over to the darkness and knew no more.
No. Hurt. No. Hurt, Sparky. Friends. Everything is fine, Tristina. Don't worry. Wake up now.
Tiffany's eyes slowly opened and rolled her head to her left. Besh was sitting up with a bandage around his head. Harry had a bandage on his face as well as his hand. Dumbledore was sitting on Besh's bed to speak to all of them.
The stone, Harry began. Relax, dear boy. The stone has been destroyed. My friend Nicholas Flamel and I had a little chat and decided that it was best all around.
But, Besh began, horror-stricken. Nicholas Flamel, he'll die, won't he?
He has enough elixir to set his affairs in order, but yes, he will die, said Dumbledore.
Tiffany and Harry looked sad at this, but Besh had other questions. Sir, did you ever find out who cursed Tiff and Harry's brooms? Asked Besh. Dumbledore nodded sadly.
Professor Quirrell and Lord Takuma have already paid for that particular crime, he said quietly.
Invisibility cloak, said Tiffany, struggling with the word. Who sent Harry and Sparky invisibility cloaks? She asked.
Dumbledore smiled.
I thought you might find those cloaks useful, he said, smiling.
Tiffany grinned and nodded. What about Takama? Where is he? Asked Besh.
Takama, I'm sorry to say, managed to escape. But I'm sure justice will be served one day, said Dumbledore soothingly.
Sir?
Tiffany asked hopefully.
Sparky go back to...
Dumbledore nodded sadly.
I'm afraid so, Tristina. You see, I believe despite how cruel your father is, he will not kill you. I am sorry, but yes, for now, your home is Wegenstorf Manor.
With that, Dumbledore left the room. Besh's ears fell against his skull at Dumbledore's words, and he looked over at Tiff, who had quite the expression on her face.
Hey, Tiff, said Harry suddenly. If it makes you feel any better, I'm in the same boat. Still got to go back to the Dursleys this summer.
Besh smirked and Tiff laughed. Harry had managed to lighten the atmosphere, for now.
A few days later, the 5 Gryffindors were sitting at the table at the end of term feast, chatting with friends and deflecting some of the more unsavory rumors that circulated their little adventure. Eventually, Dumbledore stood up and said,
"I believe it is now time to award the House Cup."
The Slytherin table seemed to smirk in unison, and the rest of the students groaned.
In 4th place, with 247 points, Gryffindor,
said Dumbledore. Dumbledore said to a smattering of applause. Harry shook his head. Besh's fists clenched, and Tiff ducked her head, fighting back tears.
In 3rd place, with 352 points, Ravenclaw.
More applause.
In 2nd place, with 426 points, Hufflepuff.
Still more applause.
And in 1st place, with 472 points, Slytherin House.
The Slytherins actually gave themselves a standing ovation, and Gryffindor House remained completely silent.
However, a few last-minute points must be awarded,
Dumbledore said over the noise, and the entire Great Hall went silent.
First, to Miss Hermione Granger, for the cool use of cool logic in the face of fire, I award Gryffindor House 50 points.
Applause started up again.
Next, to Mr. Ronald Weasley, for the best game of chess this school has ever seen, 50 points.
Even more applause.
Third, to Besh Tykos, for willing to risk his own life to see his friends safe, I award Gryffindor House 50 points.
Even more applause.
Fourth, to Mr. Harry Potter, for pure nerve and outstanding courage, I award Gryffindor House 60 points.
The applause was getting even louder now. Those who were keeping score realized Gryffindor was now only 15 points behind Slytherin House.
Fifth, it takes a great deal of courage to stand up to your enemies, but even more to stand up to your friends. For this, I award Neville Longbottom 10 points.
There could be a number of disappointing groans. Even Besh glared at his lap. Only 5 points away.
And finally,
said Dumbledore. Dumbledore said, and everyone in the great hall held their breath.
Sometimes standing up to your family can get you in worse peril than you've ever imagined. But in this case, it saved a student's life. Therefore, I award 10 points to Miss Tristina Wagenstroth.
The applause could have shattered the windows.
I believe a change of decoration is in order,
Dumbledore called out and clapped his hands. The banners that had green and silver in honor of Slytherin all changed to red and gold for Gryffindor, and Gryffindor table was the loudest table yet. Everyone was clamoring to clap one of the 6 people who'd won Gryffindor the House Cup on the back. Neville, never having won a single point for Gryffindor, was shocked. Besh could only grin up at the staff table, where Dumbledore simply sat and clapped with a small smile on his face. The next day found the 5 first years, now second years in every sense of the term, back at the station ready to board the Hogwarts Express. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Tiff, and Besh were all chatting as they got ready to board the train. Ron and Hermione had already gotten on the train, and Besh was getting ready to get on when he heard a voice say, "Oi, you 3!" And they all turned to see Hagrid making his way over to them. "Didn't think you'd leave without saying goodbye, did ye?" Hagrid said, giving Besh a tight hug, and handing Harry a photo album. Besh and Tiff looked over Harry's shoulder to see a picture of his parents waving at him. Hagrid next handed Tiff her dove. "She's been trained as a messenger owl, but Takama won't think to intercept her, 'cause she's not an owl. keep her hidden, Tiff. Tiff nodded in understanding, and Hagrid stepped back to allow them to board the train.
Feels strange to be going home, doesn't it?
Hermione asked as Besh, Tiff, and Harry found the compartment she and Ron were sitting in. You know, Hermione, Besh said, and looked at Harry. I don't think we're going home, Harry said.
Not really home now?
Tiffany finished as they all sat down to wait it out until they were to return to their separate lives and the Muggle world. Finn, Book 1. Thank you for reading. I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Besh for sending me his copies so I could repost this story. This story, and the ones that follow, were a complete 50-50 effort on both of our parts. Besh deserves just as much credit, if not more so, as I do. I can't say how grateful I am to have the honor to work with such a God-blessed and talented individual. Thank you. Book 2 to come shortly. Sorry, my voice kind of broke up in the middle of that. Thank you. Thank you so much for enjoying the story and listening to the story with me. I'm sorry about my voice kind of crackling at the end, but I think, I did it justice, I hope. The title cards, in case you didn't guess or in case you didn't know, were all drawn and colored by me. But I give Besh 100% credit to his story, his character, and future characters that are coming. J.K. Rowling, complete ownership over Harry Potter. I own nothing, just my character and Takama and the storyline. So yeah, book 2 coming soon, hopefully, as soon as I get the first title card drawn. I gotta get my voice back first. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this story and you want to see more, please like and comment down below. I really do appreciate it. Take care of each other. God bless you all. And I'll see y'all later. Oh, I gotta get my voice back.